how do you think the United States would react if, I don't know, the people of Mexico or the people of Canada or the people of Cuba or Brazil or whatever you want in that hemisphere would say, do you know what? We want to enter a military alliance with Russia or with China. Or
that hemisphere. So you often hear this so-called argument for, why Russia was justified in invading Ukraine, right? It was really Ukraine and the collective West who they really started the war because they provoked Russia. Russia basically had no choice, right? That hemisphere versus this hemisphere. So what's the implication? The implication is that the United States own that part of the world or have some kind of special claim to that part of the world, and Russia has some kind of special claim to where they are located, right? Their neighbors. I don't know. Sounds a lot like globalism, right? Or a way of getting there, right? One of the maybe a precursor to globalism, right? But I thought globalism was a dirty word according to these people, right? Because what you're looking at is empires exerting their influence, right? And because space is finite, limited, inevitably they're going to clash, right? Where one hemisphere ends, the other one begins. Okay. So at the end of the day, as Russia is exerting its influence west and maybe east also, and the United States, or if they were the only two players, right? And they're exerting their influence in all directions just the same. Well, that's just inevitably somebody's going to have to win and win a war, right? Ultimately, somebody's going to win a war, presumably, and we're going to get global government, basically, right? But I thought these guys hated globalism. I thought globalism was a dirty word. What's going on, homie? Moreover, listen.
or with both. Do you think the United States would just say, of course, you're free people, you're a democracy. Come, invite the Russians in with their missiles. Do you think that's what's going to happen?
Well, Cuba, to my knowledge, isn't a democracy. But maybe that's besides the point. Missiles, right? Well, we know what would happen. The thing that did happen, the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? Russia tried to put nukes in Cuba, and well, they fucked around and found out, basically, right? But this isn't. If even if I step into your worldview and grant you that the world should work this way, right? That it's never-ending war until we get globalism. Globalism is the only way to peace. This is the new world order. Okay, this is the shit that Klaus Schwab talks about. He presents it differently, but ultimately that's what this leads to, right? If this is your worldview, right? This is my backyard, this is your backyard, and you can't get anywhere. I get to expand my backyard, but you can't expand yours, or the other side says I could expand my backyard, but you can't expand yours. Eventually, these backyards are going to touch. There's going to be no one's going to have a backyard anymore. Russia's going to become US's backyard, or vice versa. There's going to be war, right? Ultimately, this worldview leads to never-ending war until there is one world government and no need and world peace, right? The new world order. Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. That's what this is, right? Now, the Cuban Missile Crisis is often cited as, and US's reaction to that more precisely, is often cited as an excuse for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, right? Which doesn't make any fucking sense, because it was agreed by the powers that were at the time, US and USSR, in the Budapest Memorandum that Ukraine's nukes will be taken away from them, and they haven't gotten any nukes from the West or anybody else. They got disarmed, and USSR had agreed to respect Ukraine's sovereignty. USSR has signed numerous various international treaties. One of the, I don't know exactly, UN Charter and all this other shit, the right of people to self determination, right? The USSR had signed many agreements and treaties respecting Ukraine's sovereignty, saying they will not invade them, right? And in the Budapest Memorandum, um, the way they were coaxed to sign that agreement was by removing the post-Soviet nukes out of Ukraine, right? Taking away their, disarming basically Ukraine insofar as uh, nuclear arms, right? So anytime any Russian shill talks to you about, and Russia is obviously an heir, legal and otherwise heir to the USSR, right? So everything that USSR signed, agreed to, all the treaties that they entered, Russia inherited. Okay, just FYI for those of you who don't understand this shit, right? So anytime any Russian shill talks to you about, this or that, these bitches cry so much about a verbal announcement that's maybe was confirmed by some people, a controversial verbal agreement that some lower level, maybe it was Bush, I don't remember who it was. It's really unimportant because this was never a legally binding agreement. Somebody said that we're not going to expand NATO. They were not the spokesperson for the collective West, and you didn't get anything on paper, Russia. So there was no legal agreement. So expanding NATO didn't break any rules, NATO expansion. And if it did, you let me know which one, right? USSR, on the other hand, invading, or Russia invading, well, all of its neighbors, definitely Ukraine, definitely Crimea, violated a whole bunch of treaties the USSR, and I think even Russia, agreed to. Okay? They're the lawbreakers. They are the ones who want to destroy the international rules order, and they want a new world order, something else, something different. Obviously, they want to destroy the status quo. Okay? So any Russian shill just talks about, U.S. breaking some promises or agreements. They're just an idiot. They're just repeating, spewing Russian propaganda. They're morons. But anyway, so these situations aren't congruent. They're not analogous because while USSR wanted to arm Cuba with nukes, Ukraine got disarmed. They couldn't be more different. And nobody was arming. Yeah, they gave him some JDAMs and shit, right? If you're worried about, I think it was javelins. If you weren't worried about the javelins, then don't fucking invade Ukraine, and your tanks will be safe from their javelins. Period. Right. So these situations aren't analogous. It makes no sense to bring that up. And even if I grant you that this is the world we live in, I already debunked how fucking stupid and immoral this shit is. Right. Never-ending war till we have a new world order and peace. Whoop de fucking do. And why? Well, you never hear why. But what this guy says is that United States had and this is an argument you hear a lot, like John Mearsheimer is famous for making this argument, right? But Mearsheimer is not a logical man. He is an ideologue. He has certain convictions, beliefs, and he just spews them out as if they were, fact. He doesn't have any justification for the things that he believes to be true. Not anything valid. Not anything that would be has to be universally accepted. It doesn't exist. What? God told him to say this? God told Russia to murder Ukrainians? Really? What God is that? Hmm? Fucking Russians with their jihad, holy war. I thought people on the right didn't like that shit. I guess I was wrong. Anyway, the stupidity of this argument, it's just so annoying, and it just pisses me off to hear all these clowns repeating this fucking bullshit. Okay, so what he's saying is that it's okay for Russia to invade Ukraine. Let's just grant them that they felt threatened, even though these situations are analogous, but they felt threatened, right? Just as United States felt threatened themselves. Now, the U.S. obviously had a reason, obvious reason. Why are you putting nukes there, right? USSR didn't. Russia did not, insofar as Ukraine is concerned. They didn't. Well, after they invaded in 2014, yeah, sure they did. So what he's saying is that it was okay for Russia to invade Ukraine because they felt threatened because of NATO expansion, right? And the reason why this was okay is because it was okay for the United States to feel threatened by USSR, right? Both of these things have to be true. If you're using what US did to justify what Russia did, you agree with both of them doing this, right? So you think it's okay for United States to consider Russia their enemy and take military actions against anything they think is threatening to their security in their sphere of influence, right? In their geographical area, right? Well, but using that logic, it's okay for Ukraine to feel threatened by being next to Russia, right? If Russia gets somehow closer by the use of their military to the United States, and it's okay for the United States to have a military reaction to that, then it's okay for Ukraine to invade Russia, right? Because Ukraine is part of the collective West. Russia's right there on its doorstep, right? So if it's okay to take military actions against your enemy, basically, whom you perceive to be your enemy, whom you perceive to be a threat to you, then it's perfectly okay for Ukraine to have invaded Russia. That didn't happen, right? But if he's trying to blame the West for the war in Ukraine, then he just took away his own rationale, didn't he? Because his rationale is, once again, war everywhere until there's only one ring to rule them all, and then there's no more war. That's his rationale. So war every and anywhere is okay. So why is he at the same time blaming anyone for any war when his entire worldview is war is cool until there's a sole superpower? Now you may want to talk about, uh, might is right, basically, right? Well, Russia is a hegemon, right? They're a powerful nation. They get to dictate to their less powerful neighbors. Yeah, but at the same time, just as the United States can dictate to their less powerful neighbor Cuba or Mexico or Canada, whatever. Yeah, fair enough. But while you're telling us that Ukraine is part of this collective West, part of this, it it's by proxy, by extension, it's also the hegemon. It's the Western hegemon, right? So it's perfectly okay for Ukraine, once again, to invade Russia, provoke Russia. It's perfectly justifiable for Ukraine to war with Russia, just as it's okay for Russia to war. This worldview doesn't make any fucking sense. These people are fucking idiots. Right? Why is it justify might is right to me? Because that's the worldview, right? If you're a hegemon, regional hegemon, you get to dictate to your weaker neighbors. Well, why? Justify that. Why is that so? Why is dog eat dog, might is right? Why is that a moral view? What? It doesn't make any sense. And even if I still grant you all this bullshit, right? That dog eat dog, might is right, is a moral axiom. Okay? He seems to think it is. But again, if dog eat dog is a moral axiom, then how is it immoral to attack somebody? Right? If being a hegemon gives you the right to dominate your weaker neighbors, well, and Ukraine is part of the collective West, are they really weaker? They don't look weaker necessarily. They just haven't taken their gloves off yet. It's not Russia who hasn't taken the gloves off, it's the West who hasn't. By doling out little by little help to Ukraine and not stepping in with their own military forces. Russia's thrown everything they got at Ukraine, and the West has been very reserved, patient, doling out, meting out the help. It's the West that hasn't taken the gloves off. These Putin stooges are retards. Of course they are. West got nukes too. What the fuck? And I doubt they're like rusty and fucking leaking radiation into the environment. Oh, these Russian nukes, man. Half of them fucking things are gonna explode 100 meters off the ground, man. The fuck out of here. That's why Russia doesn't want to launch them shits. Because Putin, instead of spending money on maintaining them bitches, just been taking all the, well, first of all, building his fucking palaces and taking half of Russia's air defenses to protect them. The reason why Putin hasn't launched a nuke is because the second he does, he's dead. Because they know where he is and they'll get him. And this was communicated to him. So he won't launch a nuke. Anyway, look, even if I grant you that might is right and dog eat dog is moral somehow, for which you've never even made an argument. Well, isn't Russia's hegemonic prowess, hegemony being contested right as we speak? Well, how do you become a hegemon, right? Well, by proving to all those around you that you are stronger. Yeah, but Ukraine and the collective West, they're contesting that right now. So maybe you're not. Maybe they don't want you to be a hegemon. And according to your worldview, that's perfectly fine. Because dog eat dog and the strongest get to dictate and war is cool. Right? So there's nothing wrong with the United States supporting Ukraine to destroy Russia. If that's your belief. There's nothing wrong with this. You should be in favor of all of this. You don't make any fucking sense. None of this makes any sense. It's absolute illogical, nonsensical drivel. It's all fucking drivel. That's all I gotta say.